Well, hello, book lovers. Welcome to Seriously Sandra, where we get real about books and the brilliant minds behind them. Today, I am so excited because we have with us Jamie Brenner, one of my favorite authors. Oh my gosh, we're going to dive into stories, plots, and all her writing magic. I am so thrilled. So grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's chat books. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, Sandra. Happy to be here.
Thank you. How are you?
I am doing well. It's been a type of winter where lots of excuses to stay inside and read. So my TBR, I'm making a dent into it. So that's the upside of having a harsh winter.
I understand. It's really interesting because winter, I will say, just can do something that winter doldrums, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's the blah. And I'm here in New England where it's finally, I'm so thrilled that at 5:30, there's still a little bit
Yes.
of light because it's like, yes,
Yeah,
right?
it makes a huge difference mentally. And just to be able to finish the workday and feel like you still have time to just do what you want to do, the day's not over.
Yes.
It takes a lot of pressure off in terms of feeling like what you can or have to get done in an afternoon. So all good, trending upwards there.
Ah, well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, not because just you're a fun, lovely lady to chat with, is that I loved your book Blush because your book Blush did something that I just loved. It celebrated book clubs and all those the 80s authors that were behind it. Can you tell the audience and me a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, Blush was maybe the fourth or fifth book that I published, maybe more. And, Sandra, you and I met a few books before that. I think maybe
Yes.
when I wrote The Husband Hour. And I was going around every summer talking about my books, which are typically beach books about families or mothers, daughters. There's usually some romance relationship in there. So all summer long, I travel around talking about my books. But deep down, I really had this urge to talk about the books that I'd loved growing up, the books that made me want to become an author in the first place. And those were the 80s novels they were New York Times bestsellers, but they were not what we think of today as sort of these erudite, lofty bestsellers. They were what was considered at the time sort of trashy books, but they were
Mhm.
just the best sort of epic commercial fiction, you can imagine. You don't have to imagine, you love them too. But for anyone out there who's not familiar with these books, I'm talking about Chances by Jackie Collins or Mistral's Daughter by Judith Krantz, and they were just sprawling. There were generations of these women. Some were feisty, some were oppressed. They all wanted something passionately, and just the world was getting in their way. But in the process of finding their purpose, they had these fabulous love affairs. They were just big in every way. So I wanted to talk about them because I feel like they're not forgotten. They're beloved by a certain generation of reader, but having two daughters, two young women who had no idea about these books, I realized, they were sort of becoming forgotten in a certain segment of the reading audience. So I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be great to write a book that has these books in them? So then I have an excuse to talk about them in a book tour. And that was the beginning of Blush, which is the story of a mother and daughter who go home to the family winery for the summer. And there they rediscover the matriarch's old book club, which centered around these books many decades ago. And so the current day story about these women at the winery and the struggle they have personally and professionally begins to sort of mirror the path of the women in these old novels. And in that way, they sort of come together to bring, a message I was trying to get across about going after what you want and not asking for permission and all that good stuff. It takes women a long time to learn, or at least, back in our day, maybe not so much for Gen Z. So that's how that all began and what my intention was with it.
And I remember I speaking to you before, and you said that you really studied those books of the 80s. What was the thing that you learned most, like as you were like reading it for research and then studying their styles? Like, what was some of the things you learned from that?
I felt like they wrote in a way that was very unconstrained compared to today's style. I mean, these books could go off on tangents that I can tell you there's no way my editor would let half of these like backflashes or just like sumptuous descriptions of clothing or a room that could go on and on and on for pages. And today would be seen as sort of like belaboring a point, or I mean, these books were, they could be 1,000 pages long, and no one thought twice about that. So that was one thing I noticed, that there were not reined in to keep things moving as quickly as plots seem to do today. So revisiting them, they felt a little bit slower, but also a lot richer than the books I've gotten used to. But then there was also stuff that was like problematic in terms of, you realize how much culture and society's changed, like how many things were, I don't think intentionally racist, but definitely insensitive and homophobic, things that just would not fly at all today, that were just par for the course for the discourse in the 1970s. And I think a lot of these writers, they were progressive people, or else they wouldn't have been writing those books. And yet they still were mired in that sort of mindset of that time. And I think if those women had written today, that's not, they wouldn't be writing in a way that was perceived. So I feel, and that was a big sort of pause for me recommending to young people, oh, you should read these books. They're a lot of fun. We had to have the conversation. Please try to look at this through the lens of 1960s or 1970s, because the intention, I don't believe the intention of these women, who I think were trying to talk about liberation and being true to yourself and being accepting, meant for their language to be used in that way. So that was the one complication revisiting these books. And I hope people can separate, I think, the spirit of these books from the clumsy way they conveyed the characters or some of the dialogue.
Well, because I read them just like you back then. We've talked about that. And back then, all of it was so scandalous.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, they were putting the sex scenes in, and it was like, oh my gosh, for
But the
then.
weird thing is, like, this, even the sex scenes were just, through the lens of today, it's like, wait, that was kind of like that woman just got assaulted, but it
Mm,
was just framed as like a like a typical sex scene. So that is this was especially bizarre, because they were meant to be erotic, but a lot of it was abuse for sure. Which,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And you think of that framework, and then you see it today. And
yes.
and I think that's what I enjoyed about Blush a lot, was that the granddaughter who finds this out, that that the mom and the what was being read back then was like, oh, you all read that? Like, how dare you? Like, and it's sort of, if you look back at some of the things we read or the songs we listen to, even now, it's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
it makes you wonder, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I
even if you go back, like, speaking of songs or pop culture, like, there's even recently a Bruce Springsteen song that people are saying, like, listen to the lyrics, how creepy this is. It's like, hey, little girl, is your daddy home? You want to come out and play or something? Like, I think it's a song, I'm on fire.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, we don't even have to go back that far. Like, artists, if you look too closely, there's some crazy things and stuff that became super popular.
absolutely, absolutely. And it's wild. But I really loved, like I said, I loved everything about that book, and just how the pairing, the wine, the cheese, chocolates, all of that. It's for those who have not read it, it is such a book lover's book, I think,
Thank you.
because you get into, and it made me want to go back and read some of the old, and it's hard, I think, as you just alluded to, reading something that you loved once into with today's lens, you have to just really appreciate what the youth that I was when I read it and how young
Exactly.
I was and the ideals I had at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can do that, that's where I think the real joy lies.
And then a novel summer, which is all, Provincetown. It's writing. It's in what I was most intrigued with a novel summer is that I'm noticing, and I've noticed a lot of the books lately have been talking about authors writing about their writing process, about the publishing world. And so many that this book came out, and I was like, is this a nod is it the nod of write what you know, or is it a nod to your publisher on, look, this is hard work? I wasn't sure which one
Well,
it was.
it's interesting you ask because it really wasn't my idea. My editor wanted me to write something in that space. So it was her idea. And it wasn't, you would think it would be super easy, like to, like as you said, write what you know. But I found it really challenging because so much of what you do as a writer is completely interior. So it's like, what are you going to get on the page, right? So the biggest challenge writing that book was like, how do I take what happens inside as a writer and make it external and visual and dramatic and dynamic enough to keep a commercial plot forward book moving. So I don't know if I would go there again because it looks simple, but it actually was a little bit challenging.
What was the most challenging part for you?
Trying to, like when I wrote about winemaking in Blush or jewelry design in Guilt, I could interview people who did it, and I would just pick out the most interesting parts of what they said and find a way to bring it to the page. But those are things that like you can see or taste or feel. And like I said, a book, writing is silent,
Mhm.
it's solitary, it's just pen on paper or a computer. There's nothing to show. Like the product, it's very meta because the product is what you're holding in your hand and reading, but it's
Right.
not something that you can see on the page. And also when you do something, it's hard for me to know exactly what's interesting to people who don't do it. So if I'm writing about a jewelry designer, I know it's interesting from my outside perspective. And it might not be the things that that designer thinks is the most interesting. So it's like, well, what is that? I have to assume or guess what's most interesting to someone who's a huge book lover, but isn't a writer and doesn't want to be a writer? What
Mm.
about the book lover who does want to be a writer? Like really thinking who is the audience for this book? Someone outside of this. And that's not me. I'm inside of it. So it was like I have to imagine, I have to really guess at what the readership for this book would want.
That makes perfect sense. And it was absolutely fun, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it because, the different complications in friendships and what goes on the page, or, when friends tell you stuff, what is actually private and not for everybody else. And sometimes, so I thought that was interesting.
Well, I think that is sort of there's it's really hard to be a writer. I think it's hard to be a writer and know what's okay and what's not okay to write about, even with the best of intentions. And then it's true, like people who I don't even intend to be writing about see themselves in certain scenes or certain conversations. So that is one thing that I knew I wanted to explore. The dynamic of being a writer and being influenced by people you care about, and then from the other perspective, being close to someone who's a writer and feeling like, wow, like can I even trust this person?
Mhm.
Like am I just fodder or what's off limits? And yeah, and the three women in that story, misunderstandings around one of their first books, like puts it phrased their entire threesome that they've had since college. But I'm very careful. I always ask people permission if I know I'm writing about, like in the Forever Summer, that was loosely based on a friend of mine's experience. And I asked her ahead of time, can I write
Mm.
about this, incredibly dramatic and stressful family situation that you've had? Or even in Blush, I borrowed some conversations I'd had with my own daughter, who the character of Sadie is loosely based on. So, yes, that is an interesting part of being a writer.
That is
Um,
so cool. So
yeah,
tell me, what are you working on now? Do you have a book coming out this year?
I do. I have a book coming out in the fall. I moved to this small town a few years ago, and it just was like, I love summer. I've always written summer books, but I experienced an incredible fall winter majesty in this town where I live. It's very like Gilmore Girls-esque.
Ooh.
And I really got kind of like fall fever, and I wanted a book set in autumn. I wanted, instead of like the beach side, sun, sand, frolicking. I wanted hot chocolate and fireplaces and knitting and like pure coziness. And that was the jumping off point of this book called The Weekend Crashers, which is about a mother-daughter knitting retreat in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is this super cute, quirky small town on the Delaware River. So that is coming November 4th.
Wow. That
Yeah.
and so was it just the nod of the fall that you wanted to do? Like was that what inspired you?
Yeah,
Just
I was
that?
definitely like, I wanted, okay, so I started getting really excited every fall, and I th started like rewatching Gilmore Girls and just like, just doing things that were very ritualistic as summer ended and the light changed and the sweaters come out. And I just wanted a book that was set in that moment seasonally because for some reason as I get older I'm really just feeling that vibe more and more, sort of like the cottage core, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's taking over, so leaning into it. That's the next book.
That is so fun because I am opposite to you. I am a summer baby. So I love summer, so for me the when it's hot and everything. So when I hear fall and cozy, I tease everybody and I said, well, I believe fall is harbinger of things to come.
I know. Well, it is in a way. I mean, that's sort of the poignancy of it. It's like there's a if summer is like all innocence and fun, fall is sort of like, there's a wistfulness to it. But I think that's a beautiful space to write in, just as a change. I've done maybe seven, I don't know, summer books. So
Mhm.
like, I really felt like I needed to try something a little bit different, just in terms of like, it's still fun and the same, like, the same playfulness, just against a slightly different moody
Well,
backdrop.
you know what though? I know it'll be amazing and all the characters will be. So I'm just being my old curmudgeon self because you mentioned it as a fall, but it
Do you
makes
knit? Do you knit, Sandra?
no, I do not
Okay.
knit. I'm not a knitter. I
Okay.
don't my mom actually, she knit, she crocheted, she did all of that. I got none, and she was a seamstress. I got none of her skills on that at all. So
Well,
I read.
I'm not like a super, skilled knitter. Like I see people on Instagram and TikTok who are just unbelievable. But it's really, to me, it's just like reading, a way to escape, relax, unwind, not think about anything. It's just a second form of escapism for me.
Absolutely. And I know our library has like the knitting circles that come in, and just like you have the reading circles to read, there are those. And I love
Yes.
that because it's a craft. It's getting that cozy things together. So I think that's awesome. I really do. So I always ask my book questions. What's your favorite children's book?
Oh my goodness. Okay. See, the ones I remember most, I don't remember the ones that I read as a child, but for my daughters, I loved the Olivia books
Hmm.
by, I'm gonna forget his name, and he just passed like last year. It was like that Olivia the little pig who went to all the museums
Yep.
and I yeah, I think he was my favorite. Ian Falconer,
Okay.
that was his name. And of course I loved Sandra Boynton.
Yes.
Like
Abs
really, even after my umpteenth thousandth read of those books, I mean, their spines were breaking. They went through like two kids, and I still enjoy her wit because she put a little.
Ooh.
I feel like she put stuff in there for us too. You
Yes.
know,
Oh,
like
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
the
And I
moms and
love
dads
it
too.
because the Sandra Boynton books, they make them now in board books as well
Oh,
as
not just the little
not
ones,
just
because
a
they.
little. So you can
Oh,
even get
okay,
it as a board book so you can give it to a baby, so you can start it there as well. So
yeah, I think she's
absolutely. Absolutely. All right, my other book question.
okay.
If you were going to donate three books to a library, and it can be whatever books, what three books do you think every library should have in its collection? What,
Okay. Gosh, that is a really hard question. I'm gonna have to limit it to fiction, I'm guessing. We're gonna stick with
you
novels.
know what? This is you. You get to do what you want.
Okay. This is one of the hardest questions anyone's ever asked me. For
All
fiction,
right, three favorite books then. Make it that
okay,
way. That three favorite books that you would want a
I'm looking at
library
my
to have. How's
shelves.
that?
I mean, I think we need The Wheel of Fortune by Susan Howich, which to me is just a classic. We need The Handmaid's Tale. And we need, I guess, a Judy Blume book. Like we have to get one of those in there. And then I think you're set. Like I think you're done.
All right. So those, I like that. It's so interesting because I used to, we always ask, what are you, like, what are you reading now? Who do you recommend? But I heard this asked as a question once, and I thought that I like that. What three books, and it could be something current or something past, but what would you want as a legacy to give back and say, these are the books that I want in a library?
That is such a hard question. And I probably could go through this for days until I got to like the deepest core answer. But I mean, those are three books that I love or books that I think are important for readers. But then it's like, oh, they're all women, whatever. But I gotta be honest, I'm reading a ton of nonfiction now. Like I'm really in a nonfiction um phase. Maybe it's because I feel like life has become stranger than fiction
Hmm.
and it's almost getting I read something today. I'm just like, you know what? There is no satire anymore. Like, how do you even create satire? So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, fiction used to be like, I feel like the world used to be so constrained and superficial and we had Walter Cronkite at night and then we turned off the TV and like now it's just everything all the time and I feel like I need nonfiction to just keep me rooted.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. Ah, Jamie, this has been amazing. What an amazing conversation with you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your insights. Before we go, where can people find you?
Oh, so I'm on Instagram at Jamie Brenner Writes. And I think that's the only social media I'm doing right now.
Okay,
So
so
yeah,
Jamie
that's the
Brenner
best
writes. So
place.
find her
Yeah.
on Instagram. And if you haven't read Jamie yet, what you waiting for? We'll have it in the links below. Look for her new release that's coming out this fall. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with your favorite key takeaways from the conversation of today's chat. Until next time, keep reading, keep dreaming, and keep sharing your own story. Bye-bye.